So Dave,
Sweet.
you called this meeting. You wanted Brady to take it away? You want to give an intro? I'll give an intro. Basically, nobody here except for the XPtrack team knows how to do web stuff, so Brady's going to teach us. If we have questions, do you want us to speak up during Brady? Do you want us to shout? What do you want?
Let's throw questions in the Teams chat. I kind of have I would say kind of 3 or 4 overall chunks of the presentation. Some of them are a little longer than others. My goal here was not really to go into the nitty-gritty of each little piece in terms of every nitty-gritty of the PHP language, every nitty-gritty of the Laravel framework. I kind of just wanted to give an overview of what we do special on our side. So things that you probably wouldn't be able to find in a Google search. But yeah, if you have any questions, just drop them in the Teams chat. I'll kind of get to certain stopping points, and then we can look them over. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds good to me.
Sweet.
Should we each? Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
What I would like to say, there's a terrible echo. Sorry about that. What I would like to say is my goal is it's not going to happen with this particular session, but we have a terrible deficit of capability in Laravel and in Flutter. And my goal with these sessions is that we start to take care of some of that technical deficit that is broad across our team to get everybody to be working on the latest versions of our software. So this is just a start. We'll probably have 3 or 4 more sessions like this, and we'll do the same for Flutter, so we can get more shared knowledge and get rid of some of our technical debt.
Perfect. Yeah, I will say this presentation is really geared towards mainly back-end pieces, not so much geared towards front-end development, HTML, JavaScript, which I know a lot of you folks have never seen. But again, I can't just give you everything at once. So to start, hi everybody. For those who there probably is somebody in here I haven't met. My name's Brady. I'm a software engineer here at Telarus, specializing in working on the XPtrack code base, which is also the web console code base. And I just wanted to give you guys a kind of a development overview of what we do for our web console and XPtrack development. First, let's kind of start by looking at, guys, this is the development stack for XPtrack. I see that many of you decided to work with Laragon, which is great. Laragon is just a great way to bundle everything you need so that it's in one place. There's kind of one central hub where you can control the services, manipulate the services, and things like that. There's also many other alternatives, things like XAMPP, MAMP, Herb for Mac users, or installing all of these pieces directly. Within that bundle, the main thing we talk to for XPtrack purposes is the Apache web service, or any web service for that matter, but you guys most likely installed Apache. That is kind of the foundation of, our web communications, talking to yourself on your own client or having other clients talk to you. All of that gets pointed at the Laravel framework, which is built on the PHP programming language. And that really speaks to 2 different things in terms of accessing our data. Primarily, it speaks to MySQL, which is a relational database driver, very, very popular one. Don't really need to say much more about that. And it also speaks called Redis, which is a key value pair, basically a really quick server-side cache that's all based in memory. We could talk a little bit about that later. That seems more thing. I'll touch on that at the very end. But if you're doing development for XPtrack, which includes any of our web, any of our cloud-based deployments, this dev stack is going to be very similar to what the actual tech stack on production is going to look like. But in the web console, it looks a little bit different. All of all of your front-end clients, which are not handhelds, will be doing something very similar. They'll be pointing to Apache, which looks at Laravel, and Laravel communicates with SQL Server. It doesn't communicate with Redis for this instance, just because we don't need the Redis dependency when we have the XPressEntry. So basically everything that's web related, administrative related, is going to look at Laravel to look at SQL Server, and everything which is handheld or client related is going to look at the XPressEntry service to look at SQL Server. I know some people were confused about that overall. That's the base of how the web console and XPtrack are different. I'll kind of stop there. That's a big point. If anyone wrote anything down or they want to blurt out a question, now would be a great time. I get that Redis is a key value storage, but why do you have it so much in the front of this? Dave, I don't quite understand what you mean.
So
I can explain what's going on. Redis we're using on XPtrack. Break into me if I'm wrong here, Brady, but we use Redis on XPtrack to cache the responses to the handhelds effectively, and we don't use it anywhere else. Whereas when we're in the web console mode, the XPressEntry service is doing all the handheld communication. So in XPtrack, the handhelds talk to the XPtrack server, and it uses Redis to make it so it doesn't blow up. And XPressEntry service does that internally without Redis.
Yep, second that entirely.
One other little clarification. On the web console dev stack, Brady on this slide here, top left, he has Apache listed. He's using that in place of a web service. Technically, we are using a web service called Nginx in the web console deployments. But this is the dev stack, so in your development environment, you're probably using Apache. When we actually go to deploy it, it is using a web service that gets installed called Nginx. Just a point of clarification there.
One other question / clarification, future-wise, is that I would imagine that eventually the Laravel would not necessarily have to talk directly to the database. We would eventually have some communications between Laravel and the XPressEntry service directly, regarding data managers and things in the future. Does that sound correct to anybody?
Yeah, we will have some arrows between PHP and XPressEntry service in the not too distant future. But
that's in the pipe for sure. And so Dave asks, so for our web cloud deployments, SQL Server will be replaced with MySQL. Yes. So for our cloud deployments, everything's going to look like this. We will have some extra arrows down here, which point to Supervisor, which is an asynchronous service, and this will be replaced with Nginx. But overall, Laravel will be talking to MySQL and Redis, as opposed to talking to SQL Server and potentially the XPressEntry service.
And this would be true for people using Macs as well.
Yes.
So you wouldn't have the SQL Server. You don't have XPressEntry service for people doing development on the web console. There's no SQL Server. There's no XPressEntry service. It's going straight from the handheld to the backend XPE cloud system. But it's the same. It's the same code base.
Yep.
The same PHP code base.
All the same PHP code base, just different branches. They might be a little bit out of sync, but we try to keep them as in sync as possible because we don't want to have too much deviation.
You just have to change the flag from the environment variable, then it is web console, and if you just false it, then it's a multi-tenant application.
I think Alex was saying he wanted to talk about that a little bit later in terms of kind of showing an overview of switching between web console and XPtrack development. But for now, I think we're good on questions for this. Let's move on to talk about PHP. Everyone's favorite. PHP is the language of the web. It's a weakly typed scripted language, so compiled in time. No compilation necessary, no needing to build or bundle any code before you run something. Changes you made can directly be accessed once you add another request to, call your Laravel project. It is strongly geared towards web backends, so that's why people call it the language of the web. I think it was started in 1998 or 1999 and has been the most popular language for web backends ever since. I'm not going to dive into PHP as a language syntactically or all of its nuances, but I am going to talk about some things which are important to our piece. Configuration is an important piece which a lot of people could be a little confused by with PHP. There's a lot which is actually controlled in a file called PHP INI, which you guys have already touched to set this up. It controls resource limitations of incoming requests is the big one. A lot of times if you're developing in PHP and you see a maximum memory limit exceeded, that is not because of your computer. That is because of your PHP INI. It's also used to manage extensions. PHP needs to be extended from its source in order to access a lot of different things, such as drivers to different database engines, such as working with zip files, such as working with images. The list goes on and on and on. All of that is basically managed using your PHP INI file. A lot of times, if there's something going wrong with your PHP in particular, the solution is most likely there. Another thing about PHP we're thinking about is this, are we working in a more functional space or a more object-oriented space? There is a piece of PHP called a closure. Closures are used to give a passable, assignable, basically variable-esque way to determine something callable. So there is a level of functional programming that's used in PHP. However, objects are the basis of our logic. Closures are really just for our convenience. So we will be doing object-oriented programming on this side, not functional. And if that breaks your heart, I don't know what to tell you. Traits are a specific thing to PHP, which I put in here because it took me a long time to grasp. But once I grasped, I really, really enjoyed using them. And I thought they were a very practical thing for our purposes on the XPtrack and web console code base. So traits basically are a file type which provide a reusable list of methods and properties that cannot be instantiated on its own. And I should have added something here. They also cannot be extended. So it's not an abstract class, not a class. They're its own thing, which is basically just a group of methods which you can tack on to a class. But they can contain abstract methods to enforce inheritance. So doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a trait called car, you cannot have a base class called Honda if you wanted to do something like that. But if you do have a class called car, it could implement a trait called steering, which could control of the steering functionality, and the steering functionality can be tied to a car. It could be tied to a horse. It could be tied to a bike, something along those lines. We find traits to be very, very useful in Laravel and XPtrack. I'm sure I didn't explain them entirely, but look into traits when you're doing research or looking into this or even working on your challenge. If you end up wanting to use one, you probably won't. Look into them. We use them all over the place, and they're very, very useful. Another thing is, hold on, Dave is raising your hand. Yep, Dave.
I asked the question, do traits need to follow defined interfaces to be attached to different classes?
No. It's just a group of methods or properties. I'm gonna actually keep going on. I'm gonna kind of finish this last slide and then I'll get to some questions because I'm almost done with talking about my PHP piece. I don't have a lot. Another primitive in PHP, which we use a lot on our side, is something called a standard class. It's the base object in PHP. It's a generic class with dynamic properties. So as you can see in this example here, all of these properties, name, age, and email, none of these were declared on the instantiation because it was just a primitive. But this primitive property declaration is possible on extension. So this primitive is extendable, which is very, very nice because it allows you to have something with some dynamic properties, some static properties, and then, of course, a bunch of static custom functions. This is the base for Laravel's ORM, which I will define later if you don't know what ORM means. Basically, the base of our models, something which is a record from the database, which is converted to PHP. All right, let's look at these PHP-related questions. So do traits need to follow defined interfaces? No, they only need to be, they're not extendable. So you're not going to have a base trait and then a child trait below that. It's just a list of methods and a list of properties. In our case, we most likely use methods. Nathaniel asked, can you give a more concrete example of using a trait in XPT? Sure. A trait that I built, which I really like, is this trait called syncs to handheld. Basically, imagine you have a model. A model is a PHP object or class that represents a record in the database. If I want this model,
Can you show this in code?
Show us code or have everybody open their own, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Tell people where to find it, because I don't think people even understand the general structure that it's under app traits.
Well, yeah. Okay. Everybody open up their text editor of choice. I'll do it too. And then we will look at syncs to handheld. Syncs to handheld is defined right here as a trait. This trait also, this use statement that is outside of the class or whatever declaration you need, these are going to be your imports, and a use statement inside of your declaration, so inside of these parentheses, is going to define where the trait begins. I'll zoom in a little bit. So here, as you can see, I have a bunch of static methods which I define: get latest version, get table name, get handheld data paginated, get handheld photo info, get handheld photo data. A lot of these are set to null because most models do not utilize these functions. And then as you can see, I have an abstract implemented here. So that means when I have a model which syncs to the handheld and I need to use that model, and I need to basically fill out what columns of this model are going to sync down to our handheld. This abstract here is to enforce that I define that on whatever model I need. So let's go, we'll look, again, we could do 2 columns. That's probably easier for this view. And what's something that syncs down to the handheld? We can do reader model. So as you can see, my reader model right here will have my syncs to handheld trait declared right here, right under where the parentheses begin. If I kind of scroll down, I can see this handheld sync column is defined right here. If for some reason I was to remove this and save the file, it should throw me an error. And it should say that modules, reader model does not implement method handheld sync columns. And that is enforced through this trait right here, which looks at this abstract. But again, there's not really an inheritance structure here. Nothing is exactly extending one trait. You can add as many traits to a class as you desire. They're not necessarily in an interface structure like these implement statements here. They don't necessarily extend something like this base class here. It's really just a list of methods and a list of attributes. Comes in a lot of handy. And yes, Nathaniel brings up a good point that if you use Control P and you're in VS Code, you can search for any file by name. So a lot of times when you're starting out, the directory structure might get a little lost on you, but using that will be super, super helpful. And then Amim says that a multiple inheritance workaround is a trait plus an interface in PHP. That's true. So sometimes if you have an interface which you want to implement, and then there is code that you want to, and then there are concretes of that interface which you want to kind of be shared across a bunch of classes, you can implement an interface and then have a trait which basically makes all of those things concrete and defines all of those methods properly. All right. Anybody else have any other questions on PHP? Throw them in the chat in the next now.
So very quickly, traits are effectively just kind of like utility functions that work on a variety of classes.
Yeah, they can work on any class.
And then you can call them directly from the class as opposed to having a high level helper function that splitters up code other places.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Let's talk about Laravel now. Laravel is a web application framework built on PHP. There's a lot of them, but Laravel is the most popular framework of this type today. It's definitely the most popular PHP framework. I believe it is the most popular web framework. Two of the most important things about Laravel, which I want to make clear, is it follows something called the MVC application architecture. That stands for Model View Controller. I will get into that in the next slide. And it also relies on something called syntactic sugar for developer experience, which a lot of people can find confusing at first. Some people find it helpful. Some people find it weird. I will just kind of give you an overview of what that means, because you'll be seeing a lot of it as you look through a Laravel application. Let's talk about MVC, Model View Controller. I'm actually not sure if XPressEntry service is already built on MVC. I don't believe it is, but MVC is a very popular architecture for, thank you, Chris. It's a very popular architecture for web applications. And this kind of flowchart is an overview of how it works, but let's work through it step by step on the slides. So the model represents the database. Models represent a table of a data. Classes called a model represent a table in the database, and instances of a model represent rows in the database through something called an ORM, which I will get into in the slide after this. That seems to be the easiest part for all of this. Views represent information formatting sent to the front end. So HTML, JSON, any other way which you could format data, or even a blob, any other way which you format data and send it to the front end is considered a view. Controllers fulfill the requests. So basically, controllers connect these two things together. The user will use a controller, access a controller via a route. The controller will find models, manipulate models, and then models will be used to fill views. The controller will then send back views, so that's what the user sees. And by sees, we're talking about what a client can see. So most of our app is API driven, lots of JSON that we're seeing, not always a ton of HTML. So it's not always visibly rendered for the user or for the client, but all of that is still considered part of the view. And let's talk about ORM a little bit. I know XPressEntry has an ORM. It has to. I just don't know if people are familiar with the word. It stands for Object Relational Mapping. There's basically an abstraction layer between SQL statements and objects created in whatever programming language you need. In our case, PHP. The name of Laravel's ORM is called Eloquent. This is important when it comes to doing a Google search. If you're trying to find, oh, what's this special query syntax? You can probably find it a little bit faster if you use Eloquent in your Google search or AI prompt, as opposed to using Laravel directly. Let's talk about syntactic sugar. this is where things get a little bit strange. Syntactic sugar really, in terms of how I defined it, because I couldn't really find a super consistent definition for it, comes down to convenient, grammatical, and global snippets of code. Things which at first glance may look like, how did that get there? Why do I have access to that right here? Why didn't I need to do any more work? Laravel will give you a lot of those for free. Here's some fun examples. So let's say you're in the middle of a request and you need to find the authorized user for this request. You could just use auth parentheses, arrow, which is basically dot notation, user parentheses. Laravel just gives that to you for free. That is accessible globally throughout the scope of your entire request. And let's also say in your controller, you want to add some validations to it. Well, there's this special class that's called form request. Form request can just be placed in the parameter of your controller. You don't even need to call your controller methods directly. You will just put form request into your controller, and automatically those validations will be applied. It's interesting. One which you'll probably use the most is if you need to query, you could just use the model. There's a lot of super convenient model methods to emulate SQL. And then I'll walk you through this one. You're taking the company model, you're basically doing a where statement on it where name equals Talaris. And then at the end, this get statement is going to pull what Laravel calls a collection, which is a fancy array of records that you can iterate through. You could do whatever you need. You could manipulate them each one by one. Basically allows you to do that. Now, the question that a lot of people on the internet ask, and I also ask myself, is it magic or is it confusing junk? And honestly, that's for you guys to decide. As you work through this code, you'll see a lot of different things in Laravel that will make you go, how did that get there? Laravel put it there. Is it for better or for worse? That's up to you. Before we get into what's special about our XP track code base in general, let's look at a couple of questions. So in our chat, we have you found inadvertent crossovers from code that gets put in the model, controller, or view code? Dave, could you explain that one a little bit more?
Oh, I can do that because I think it's interesting. In Rails, you use MVC also, right?
Yes.
And something that very often like new Rails devs would do is put things that belong in the controller into the view, right? Logic for like what you should be displaying. So is there a standard on how to break that stuff up?
Yes, I'll get into that. That's in this next section, the longest section. It kind of is part of our directory structure. It kind of shows you basically all of the basic stuff that you need to build a resource, build a module in our application, and all of that is well separated into things that pertain to the model, things that pertain to the controller, and things that pertain to the view. Does that answer your guys' question?
Yes, yeah.
I think Dave, there definitely are some, but we've really, especially within the past few months, have tried our best to really make our separation of concerns strong and try to only use things where they need to be used.
So here's what my question really is. People will screw this up. Where have you seen it screwed up consistently? And what code have you had to go back into and fix because people haven't put code in the right places?
I think a lot of it is one thing I strive for is to have a lightweight controllers. So if you have any sort of heavy backend logic or any sort of model logic or any sort of complex things in the view, you don't want those going in the controller. You want those going in separate places, and then you want the controller accessing those and bringing those together. So I think the best thing you can strive for is to build a lightweight controller. That is absolutely what you should be doing. We actually have a base controller for most of our most generic CRUD stuff we're going to be doing. You don't even need to touch a control. You shouldn't even need to touch the controller at all. And then everything else that the controller depends on, you will provide to the controller in its initialization. And that will be used to bind, model, and view things to it. So yes, I think the crossover really comes in putting way too much in the controller. Dave also asks, is syntactic sugar just a PHP or Laravel shortcut? It's a bunch of Laravel shortcuts. PHP does not provide these directly. Laravel tries to do a lot behind the scenes, so that way certain methods, certain objects, certain pieces of the request are just given to you. And is there a place to find these shortcuts? They're littered throughout the Laravel documentation. There's not one good place to see all of them. You can look in something. I will type this in the chat. If you look at something called facades in the Laravel docs, I could send a link to this while you guys are doing your challenge. That is one place where you'll see a lot of these kind of magic methods, but all throughout the Laravel documentation, you're going to see things which are like, that's really convenient, but I have no clue how that works. Really, it's just a heads up. You're going to see that a ton. Kelly asks, is syntactic sugar our standard practice? It is Laravel's standard practice. We try to use it as much as we can, but Laravel, honestly, in my opinion, makes it kind of hard to use. It's not super easy to find all of the places where it's accessible, and a lot of times you end up working around it or kind of doing something in 3 lines that could have been in 1 line, but just because of finding out how to do it in 1 line would have taken a long time. Yeah, it's everywhere, and it is standard practice, but sometimes it's hard to find, and a lot of times in our reviews, we'll go back and forth and say, hey, I've seen this facade, I've seen this helper before, you should use this instead, because this can actually reduce it into 1 line or, 10 characters as opposed to 30, etc., etc. Any other Laravel specific questions? Right now, I'm about to get into what is specific about our app and what makes it different from other Laravel apps. But is there any other high-level Laravel stuff that people need to know? Does Copilot help with finding these? Can we prompt an AI to help use these? Yeah, Copilot will be helpful in finding these. If you want to ask chat, what's the easiest way in Laravel to access this? And if there is some Laravel magic behind it, chat will definitely be able to help you out. But sometimes it's wrong, as AI and Copilot can be wrong. So
one of the things that I've seen with a lot of the AI research that we're doing is that if we can pre-prompt the AI to have knowledge of what we're looking for. So if you can say, we would like to use facades as much as possible in our code base and to use Laravel syntactic sugar, it will drive the AI in ways that will suggest code that uses these sorts of things. But if you don't explicitly tell it to do, and in the Claude system that we're using, we actually we put it into a defined file in the project that says, this is how we want you to act. If we don't do that, it'll go all over the place. But if we tell it exactly how we want it to act, it will give us better answers, directing us in those paths. So that might be something that we think about figuring out the right directives to put into our PHP project, so that Copilot, Claude, whatever AI tools we're using can help us and accelerate us in the right direction a little bit better.
Heard.
Alex, can you give yourself a task to look at how we might have AI configuration files that might guide us in terms of it suggesting how to use syntactic sugar and facades and other best practices that we would like to use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nathaniel also provided in the chat documentation to the helpers page in the Laravel docs, which is also very useful. A lot of times helpers will use facade, or a lot of times facades are only accessible in helpers. So check that out on your own time. But let's move on. Let's talk about what's special about XPtrack. I'm using XPtrack to refer to the code base that doesn't just include, of course, the code for XPtrack, our Teleris product. That's also for XPressEntry Web, also our product, the exact same code with a different style, and for the web console, which is 99.3%, as Alex said, the same code, but deployed on customer systems as a way to interface with their XPressEntry database. So what's special about XPtrack? It could be tenant-based. The web console is not tenant-based, as I know many of you have probably run into during setup, or Chris Stotts has informed you on when helping you get set up, but XPtrack and XPressEntry Web are tenant-based. The web console is not. But that does differentiate our processes in terms of accessing data. We build something called an SPA. It's not an optimal SPA, but it is by definition an SPA nonetheless. That is a single page application, which is built full stack in Laravel, which is rare. A lot of times single page applications will use kind of a Laravel API and then something else to build the front end. But we build a single page application full stack in Laravel, which is a lot more front end driven, which I won't really be getting into much today, but it is important to think about, and I'll talk about it in a slide coming up. We also have a module driven directory structure, which basically means instead of having everything in a bunch of base directories, we have a bunch of directories on a per module basis. It helps us separate our concerns, and I will get into that in a later slide. Let's talk about tenancy. So right here, we have an example URL. Many of you have used this URL to access your time cards, to clock in and out of work. This first subdomain actually controls which tenant is used, and each tenant has their own database. So on a super administrative page, which is actually admin.xptrack.com in this case, when a new tenant is created, a new migration is run to create a new tenant database where all the tenant information is stored. So tenant information is not in tables and parsed out or has separate IDs or whatever. It's not partitioned in the sense that people would understand partitioning. It actually is in its own database. They have all of their own data. And this really root domain really for the web case just differentiates between XPtrack and XPressEntry Web. That is the same code deployed on different servers with different styles. That's truly it. And then for the web console, all of this is ignored. This is, you can access via IP address directly. Tenancy is ignored completely. Don't even have to think about it. Now let's look at a single page application. A single page application really means that the user never has to refresh. Tables and forms are all loaded asynchronously. So when you click on a module on your left side, you're not going through a refresh cycle on the web page to load all of that new data. You're just calling something called an AJAX request, which stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Sounds like kind of a dated term. I don't think people really send XML anymore. Really, you're sending a lot of JSON packets. That's what we're doing, but it's still called an AJAX request. So as opposed to having a GET request and then returning an entire web page back, or posting a form and returning an entire web page, we're having an initial request, and then every request after that is an AJAX request, which is getting some packet of JSON data. We are programmatically, as you can see, my cat is being a very bad boy. we are programmatically taking this JSON data and returning it to the client and doing something with it. Before we get into this directory structure that I mentioned, there seems to be a couple questions. If anybody is still confused on what tenant-based meant after that slide, type another question while I answer Nathaniel's. When you say SPA is full stack Laravel, are you meaning we don't use a proper JS framework, or is there more going on? The answer is yes, we do not use a proper JS framework. We build our own JavaScript framework, which honestly I'm going to have to get to a whole nother time because that is its own beast. But yes, we have a
It's based on jQuery question mark?
jQuery is not a JavaScript framework. jQuery is just a JavaScript library that makes things. jQuery is just a JavaScript library that provides helpers, really. We use it all over the place, but we could build the exact same app right now without jQuery. It would just be a few more lines of code. Dave asked, you said we are a single page application. I think we have some forms that act as non-SPA. From what I can understand by the definition of a single page applications, if we are grabbing those forms asynchronously and not refreshing, which I don't believe we are doing anywhere in our application. Alex, actually, can you second me on that? Are we doing anything that's non-SPA in our app right now? Besides
technically we are refreshing in between modules right now. We are set up very close to being an SPA, but truly we do have a refresh in between module.
But it's not a whole page refresh. It's not the same as clicking the refresh button on your browser like this.
But it effectively is in terms of the data that's coming across, because you're looking at the sub. It's not as clean as some of the new structures are.
Oh, totally.
You can say we're an SPA, but we really, in terms of how we are doing things, having a web app, which would be a true SPA, we are a weak SPA because we're doing things in terms of driving HTML back and forth as opposed to driving data back and forth.
Mm-hmm. And the HTML is packed in HTML is just packed in JSON. But still, yep, Dave is completely right. Most SPAs do not function like our application does. They actually render all of the front end code in one pack, and then from there, it's just JSON data packets, and then the front end kind of decides what code it uses. Still, how we do it is very unique, and I just wanted to make that clear. It's actually in the process of getting refactored. I shouldn't have even said that, though. I should just move on to the directory structure, unless anybody else has another question.
Before you leave, only half of the people on this call have actually said that they understand what a tenant-based application is, which means that we have a large contingent that really don't understand what a tenant-based application is.
Sure. So, does anybody have any specific questions on what people mean, what tenancy means?
So it's very hard when you don't understand what tenancy means to ask questions that clarify it. So some of the things that are important about multi-tenancy is we have one code base that runs the PHP in the backend on our web-based system. This is not XPressEntry. This is our web-based XPressEntry /XP track system. We have one code base that runs the Laravel and PHP code, and then we have multiple databases that are separate.
Yes.
And to access the different databases, you have different front names, like Teleris is in this slide, that drives you to the particular database. And on the web backend, by being driven to this Teleris, you also have different configurations that get set for that company. And it's important to note that under Teleris.xptrack.com, there are many users. So each one for this particular tenant, which is us, every one of you has the ability to clock in, clock out, to set your locations, to update your user profile. So you live in that tenant. We have another customer, Timec, that is using XPtrack for tool check-in and checkout. Completely separate database, but it uses the same Laravel code base. It's really important that you understand what multi-tenancy is in terms of XPtrack, because it's very, very different from XPressEntry.
Yes.
Sorry, the on-premises XPressEntry that we are deploying broadly to most of our current clients.
A really quick question. So does that mean, like, you say it uses multiple databases, but is there going to be multiple instances of, like, for example, XPtrack that's ran like on Docker, or is it just
No.
one instance and then
So
it
it'll
connects
be
multiple?
one container, basically. On every request, there is a snippet of code that looks at the host URL and determines the tenancy from its subdomain right here. Really, all that's happening in our code is we're deciding which database to look at, depending on the tenant. But all of the code stays the same. Yeah, Alex?
Chris, there's nothing that says that we can't spin up multiple containers that are running this PHP code. We just haven't had the need from a load standpoint yet, but they would all be looking at the same databases. So we could absolutely put our PHP behind a load balancer and serve and spin up 4 different containers that are running this code. But that's not required from a tenancy standpoint. They're 2 different questions, really. The tenancy is just dividing up the customers into their own individual databases so that one customer is not the opposite way to do this is to have a single giant database that in the individual rows has a column that says this belongs to this customer. We are separating it out at a database layer so that each customer has their own database, and to access it, they need to plug in Teleris.xptrack.com or Timec.xptrack.com.
Thank you.
All of this is true. Any other questions regarding tenancy or single page apps? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, let's move on to kind of the meat and potatoes of all of this, which is our specific directory structure. And when I'm talking about our directory structure, it's also going to outline pieces of a Laravel application, and I mean low-level pieces of our Laravel application that we use across the majority of our modules that you will also be using to define module code, which is create new modules, find bugs in modules, things like that. So everything we have is stored in this top level. Almost everything we use is stored in this top level modules directory. It's separated by independent features or elements. We call them modules. Most of the time, these are separated based on things you can find in that left sidebar, depending on what features you have enabled. If you look into something like Teleris.xptrack.com, this is our users module. This would be our groups module. This would be our muster sites module, our holidays module. You get the gist of it. Normally, in a Laravel app, everything would go inside of the app directory. So there would be an app/controllers, app/models, app/resources, app/requests, blah, 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 blah. We still do have a good amount in our app directory, but this really helps us organize it better for our use case. It makes things so much cleaner, so much easier to find, and so much easier to know when something is in the right place or not. Within each module directory, there's these 6 main subdirectories that we have, which are controllers, models, requests, resources, routes, and views. I'm going to walk through every single one of these. So let's start with routes. Routes define our API. Routes are, I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with what a web route is. Gives you access to information on a website. It gives you a path to a specific type of data for a web application. These are only going to directly interface with the controller, and it's also going to directly interface with middleware, which we will talk about later. And the CRUD ones are made generic for you. So let's look at this company routes file. I'm going to use the companies module as kind of the baseline for all of this stuff, just because it's relatively lightweight in terms of logic, not a lot going on behind it, and it's pretty easy to understand. So we have our PHP initialization and some import statements here. These define resource routes and define API resource routes are actually defined by us. These 2 methods right here are going to build default CRUD routes for everything you need. So these are going to build CRUD routes for the web front end, and these are going to build CRUD routes for our REST API, which you guys aren't going to be concerned about right now. But this define resource routes on companies, this is going to define the root URL. So everything's going to be companies / whatever. And then this company controller is going to define what controller you're looking at for the implementation of these routes. Yeah, Dave.
I would like verbal confirmation from everybody that they are looking at their code base in whatever code editor that they're on, so that they actually are able to look at the company's module, so that they know where to find this, and because unless we get confirmation from everybody, it's not like you're showing stuff, but it's not actually being translated. So Chris, you're seeing this on yours?
Oh yeah, I've got to open on the right in VS Code, and everybody should.
Annam?
I opened it on this system.
Alex?
Yep.
Kelly?
Yep.
Okay. Albert?
Yes.
Albert, I'm going to throw a question at you.
Okay.
What do you see in the views directory?
Views directory. It's going well. Right now I have the company routes .php right now, and I just see like use illuminate, support facades, routes.
No. So in the company controller. So Brady, can you pop over there on your VS Code and expand the directory? So you're going to modules, company, and you see a few things. So if you expand the controllers, modules, requests, resources, and routes and views, you can see this is a very simple module. And under views, there are 2 files. There's companies.blade.php and company.blade.php. So this is where I want people to be looking, because I want people to understand where they're going to. Hurwitz, are you seeing this?
I don't have access to the code base, but I'm seeing what you show on the screen.
So we need to get Chris the access to the code base. Sorry, that should have happened before.
I'll get that later.
Simon?
Yeah. I'm seeing this.
Sam?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I'm there.
Okay. Mohsin?
Yes.
Srija?
Yeah, I see. And I also see that latest changes was not pulled, but I just pulled that. Then I see resources also. It was not there before.
All right. Riley?
Yeah, I have it open.
Okay. Juliana?
Yes.
Nathaniel?
Yes.
I guess I don't need to ask Samuel's note taker. Laith?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Donnie?
Yes.
Yvonne?
Sure.
And Suba?
Yeah.
Okay. It's really important as we're going through this, and I'm getting echo now, that you're tracking things. Okay, who's echoing?
It was Yvonne. I got him again.
That you're tracking things in your own code editor, because if you don't know where things are, you can't look and you can't make intelligent decisions. Sorry, Brady. If we don't actually verify that everybody's on the same page, we get things like, oh, somebody doesn't have the GitHub repository.
Real
Sure
quick, anybody who Chris gave a copy of the repo to rather than direct repo access, like the support people, I believe, your directory structure will look slightly different if you don't have the latest stage code. You will be missing the request and resources folders in the module, and that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna stay on the slides to kind of look at, so I can kind of point to overall ideas. These define resource routes and define API resource routes are implemented by us. You should, and if you have the correct PHP extensions installed, which I will honestly send after the presentation is over, a list of PHP, or not PHP extensions, VS Code extensions that will aid you in your development. You'll be able to control, click around, and go to some references, go to definitions of these things. But these top level resources define the basic CRUD, and then down here we have kind of these list or group of routes which share common middleware right here. So as you can see, this route middleware and without middleware defines basically the steps that this request passes through before it gets to a controller. And then each of these route declarations here will share the same middleware. And you can see the route path is defined right here as issued items and company. This is going to bring us to the company controller's issue items and company method. And the name of this route is going to help aid in Laravel's authorization and enabled features. You won't need to worry about that so much right now. That's more of a V2 or V2 or V3 of learning thing. But just know that we have all of our base routes defined here and then sub routes defined below. I suppose on this one, I'll kind of stop at each point because these are big concepts. Does anybody have any direct questions on the routes file? What is middleware? Donnie will get into that at a later step. I know I just asked if anyone had any questions, but that I do have a slide for that later on. I just wanted to talk about routes because that's kind of the first thing that you think about when you think of a web request.
So Brady, can you type in the chat what these different routes actually are?
Sure.
Like what would it would be Solaris.xptrack.com/
So sure, it would be tenant.xptrack.com/companies. We would also have a tenant.xptrack.com/companies. Oh, well, this method above, it would have a
So is there an issued items in company route?
There is, yes. Something you can run, which is very helpful. Let me pull this up really quickly. Uh-oh, why did that go up there? Giving you guys all something to run in your command line, which is way better than me just typing things out. Running this command here in your command line will show you a list of all of the routes you have defined and their methods. So whether they are get request, post request, put request, delete request, it will show you a comprehensive list of all of them. So if you want to do that and you can string match on companies, I actually don't remember how to do that in command prompt. If someone else could figure that out for me and type that in the chat, that would be super helpful. So I can kind of move on and get to these other questions. Is there an example of one with query parameters? Is this where these would be defined? What about a post? Query parameters are not directly tied to a route. Those will be accessible in the controllers. And middleware is going to be used to validate the parameters, the query parameters for a route, or something known as a request class, which I will get into in a second. Is there a way to determine? Oh, there's an error on this. Alex, could you maybe direct people to a branch where they can view the route list? Because I know some branches are broken on it. Thank you. Is there a way to determine if a route delivers HTML versus JSON versus JS? Not directly. That is all going to be defined within the controller. And we have a base controller which predefines most of what we need. All of our routes will return some form of JSON or HTML, whether that is empty HTML, whether that is an HTML page loaded directly on your screen, or it's HTML inside of JSON, which is programmatically added. Yep, blade files we're going to get into in another slide. All of this is questions about just this route file right here. Seeing some good questions so far. If anyone has anything else, hit me. Nathaniel says, change your directory to root in your terminal and you can run the route list command. Thank you, Nathaniel, for that.
I think I'm in the root.
No, you
Go back
need to be
up one directory.
You're in the public folder. You need to be up one.
Not found exception.
I actually had the same error as Dave.
That's what I'm getting to.
Alex said he's looking into it.
Yeah, looking into it. I did this for a pen test people like 3 days ago, so I'm not sure what happened. I'm looking into it right now.
All right. Because we can't look at the routes right now because of that exception, Alex is looking into it. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is going to be our controllers. So if everybody wants to look at company controller.php in whatever text editor they're using, you'll see the start of a file which looks something like this. As you can see right here, if you look up at the class declaration right here, you will see that this company controller extends something called the base controller. The base controller covers all of our actions for basic CRUD. And by actions for basic CRUD, that means looking at the index page, loading data for the index page, looking at a form, loading data for that form, submitting form data, whether that's creating a new record or updating an existing record, and deleting data. All of those actions are going to be covered by this base controller. But then you may ask, how does the base controller know what models or views or processes to look at? The constructor builds all of those dependencies to the model and view. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of these properties which are used by the base controller to determine what to use. So some of this kind of looks forward a little bit. As you can see, we have these requests, which we will get into in a second. We have a details resource, which we will get into a second, and we have a model. Requests provide validation for this record. Details resources provide API and JSON data formatting, and then the model is the model. It also has string paths to our company's Blade files, all of our view files right here, as you can see in the view directory. Those have to be strings. Why? Because of Laravel magic. And all route definitions match a controller method. So if we go back to our routes file, we can see that this vendor select lists is defined here in the controller, as it was also declared to be defined in the route. So really, the main thing I want to emphasize about controllers is we try to keep our controllers as lightweight as possible. We don't want to have a bunch of heavy logic in our controllers, especially because that logic is most likely to be reusable across different routes and across different actions. We would like to be able to parse those out and put those in their own unique files. I'll stop here. Does anyone have any questions directly related to the controller? Can I suggest that we add documentation comments to the base controller of each of those attributes so we know what they mean? That way, when we build new controllers, we have a better understanding of how to set those. Absolutely, we could do that. That is something that I think we need to work on as a team, is better document all of this so that not all of the best documentation is in this presentation. Any other questions from anyone else? I'll give you guys a few more seconds. Yeah, Dave.
Is there a clear way to know which controller method matches which route definition?
That will all be defined in. So if you look at, I'm going to open up my VS Code here. If I follow into this, if I find the definition of this define resource routes, so should be able to just go straight to definition right here. All of these are the base CRUD routes that we're going to have for all of our resources, besides these partition routes down here. They're all going to follow the URI defined here. So the index, this is the controller method name, and then this is the path URL. So
right.
For
So in terms of company routes, so go back, please.
Mm-hmm.
So this is you use define resource routes. That's actually going back to the base, the app routing, not the module routing.
Well, there's basically a route building helper that we built to construct a bunch of routes so we don't have to do it for each individual module.
Right. So I guess looking down lower, you have issued items in company.
Mm-hmm.
And company routes. So if you go to company routes.php, you go down to the first line, issued items in company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually going to be driven to there. And that, so you can always find what route you are connected to. What controller functions you're connected to from your routes file.
Exactly.
In the modules. Got it.
Yep. All of those will have a one-to-one mapping. I suppose while we're here, we can kind of look at how these are defined. So I can Takes me a while to do this. I don't normally set up my editor like this, but let's look at our base controller. I won't go into the nitty-gritty details of all of this, but as you can see, we have all of these routes defined here in our list will match with a controller method of the same name, such as index, create. We have edit right here. We have lists right here, which is going to be our data table data. We have our show method right here, and we have store and update and our delete request, our select lists request, which is out of order, but going to be defined right here, and then some of the partition stuff that we won't be worrying about today. That's just a kind of the medium level of what's mapping all of these kind of default CRUD routes we want to build for you automatically are all defined in here. Any other questions pertaining to controllers? One more thing I will add, if we look right here at in our company controller at the vendor select lists method, you can see that there's this parameter called request, which you can find from the import statements is illuminate HTTP request. That is something that Laravel is going to magically pass into your controller methods. These are not going to be called directly from anywhere in your app. Oop, let me go back one. They're not going to be called directly from anywhere in your application, but Laravel will give you the request for free without you having to manually pass it in. And if someone, maybe Alex or Amim, could send documentation on that request class so people can know kind of how to navigate it and some of the things we do with it, that would be awesome. Just again, another piece of syntactic sugar that is helpful and maybe a little bit confusing at first glance. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, let's move on to the model. So everybody go ahead and let's look at company model.php. Should be under modules, company, model, and inside here will be company model. The model is the base of the ORM, the object relational mapping. Basically, a model is going to represent a database record, or an instance of a model is going to represent a row in the database. This is the source of all of our database logic. So anything that pertains to high-level queries or any other database manipulations you want to do specific to database manipulations on this table, all of that should go inside of your model. There's a couple of key things I want to point out in the model, which are just kind of stuff which is really, really important, where you will likely make a mistake, and I want to point them out to you. The first one is lists the columns fillable by clients. So this fillable attribute this fillable protected attribute right here is basically going to be a list of columns on your table. These are things which you want the clients to be able to change. So when a client performs an update statement on this model, they're only able to change these columns. I believe these are all of the columns. Certain things you maybe wouldn't want to add in here. You don't need to add your timestamps, so created at, updated at, or deleted at. Those are done automatically behind the scenes in Laravel. You do not want to, for most instances, you don't want to add your ID or your primary key. You also wouldn't want to add things which maybe are automated by your database, whatever else you may need. And then down here is another important thing, which we define: the formatting and order structure of all of the columns in our data tables on the front end are defined in the model using this define grid calls method right here. As you can see, these are a list of these grid service objects, which have a key, title, value, sort, and then a couple other options here. The order of these are used to define columns in the grid. I will continue on before I get to questions about the model. There's a little bit more we have to know about here. Laravel provides relationship helpers through Eloquent. So as you can see right here, a company can be associated to many users because users have a company ID, and it can also be associated to many catalog items because catalog items have a manufacturer ID. We want to define this in Laravel's way, which is using Eloquent relationships. Amim or Alex, if one of you guys could drop the documentation to that in the chat, that would be awesome. Really, what this goes to say is we want to avoid writing plain SQL at all costs. We have a company lists method right here, which is going to use some fancy Eloquent stuff to get lists of companies, order them, perform all of the database actions we need here. That is basically the core of all of this. While we do have some raw SQL throughout our application, we want to try to avoid it as much as we can. We want to use, because raw SQL, when you're switching between database interfaces, such as going from SQL Server to MySQL, the raw SQL changes, but the Eloquent allows you to interface with both and get the same result every time. I'll stop here for questions. I feel like models are probably the one that we all are most familiar with. So any questions regarding the model?
I'd like to have somebody, if you can go back to the last slide.
Sure.
Sorry, one more back, that one. Srijit, what do you understand what the difference is between fillable and what is in the defined grid columns?
This one, right?
So if you look, there's fillable and then there's defined grid columns.
Company model.
And interestingly,
yep,
this is different from what I see in my Brady. This is different from what I see in my company models directory because it's the order is different.
Sure. Order doesn't really doesn't matter.
Your file, what you're showing here doesn't match the actual file in.
I reordered the file a little bit to make it convenient for each slide so I could kind of group them correctly, but
okay.
The order of the methods in the file, we have no predefined way of how to order things. Normally attributes go at the top, but you can also put attributes below functions or methods if you want. We probably should define, Alex, we probably should define a proper ordering for that. That would make things simpler.
So back to Srija. Do you understand what the difference is between these fillables and the report fields and define grid columns?
As I understand, like this was dynamically changeable, like he said, like fillable, and the next thing what we can directly use to the views. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. You're with the fillable columns, this fillable property right here, this is provided by Laravel. This allows you to give a list of columns which are fillable by clients. Well, really just fillable within the code. So whenever you perform any model manipulations, these columns are updatable. And define grid columns is provided by us in our specific application to give a way to send all of your columns to the database. And there's formatting, but the is within them as well.
Oh, okay.
Or not to the database, to the data table.
Okay,
to the data table on the front end.
Yeah, I am thinking like it was also using to getting the data, right, from the DB.
Yes, this doesn't, it provides the outline for how we fetch data, but this is really to define the formatting of how we send data to the front end in our data tables. It's one of the, I will say, it is going back to one of Dave's earlier questions. This is kind of a place where we have sort of view and model kind of blurring the lines a little bit here, where this could be considered a view element. We define it in the model because it's because that's the way it was refactored to be done. It's a pretty succinct way of doing it, and it doesn't require creating an extra file. So could be argued that it maybe doesn't follow MVC to a T, but it also is fairly nice and, in my experience, fairly easy to use. Yeah, Dave.
So we have I'm trying to relate this back to what I know from Rails. In Rails, you actually define what you're going to be seeing in the table in your model as well. This doesn't seem to actually define the database.
Not at all.
Not at all. So where is the database defined, and how do you update the database? Because that's what I would normally expect to see in a model. So where is that in this project?
Like a schema?
Yeah. So, well, if I'm going to, let's say I add a new field to companies, and it's is supplier. If it's making something up. So we have an is manufacturer, we have an is vendor. So now we're going to have an is supplier, and that's going to be a new Boolean. I don't see any place where it's actually defined in this file, something that matches what the actual database schema is. So where does that connection happen in Laravel?
It doesn't, in the way that you're thinking. There's
no migration. There's no.
Oh well, there is a migration, but there's no place. Maybe I'm losing, because yes, there are migrations. I'm not going to talk about migrations today because they do not pertain to the web console, which is a lot of people's way of interacting with this code base.
So if I wanted to figure out what the actual type of can issue to is for set, where would I go to find the actual type of that and what it?
A database tool that's not defined anywhere in the Laravel application.
Oh, interesting.
You would have to look directly in your database. Laravel does all of that behind the scenes.
Or the migration
Actually,
file
that's
itself.
defined in the migration, but as you are not using the migration in web console, from web console perspective, we can say that it's not defined. But from XPressEntry perspective, we can say it's defined in the migration file. If you go to the migration folder and you see all the migration files, they are defined, all the columns and the types and the length and everything.
Sorry, I didn't actually get which file that was, NM.
Migration folder. In the migration folder, you will see all the files that's related to this migration. The root directory, you can see database folder, and inside it there is a folder named migrations.
Sorry, go to apps. Where is that? So are you in app?
Hold on,
No,
let me just put it in
app.
the chat. Let me just put it in the chat.
Thank you. It's database.
Yeah,
It's
right.
database, migrations. There, you got it, Nathaniel. And then in the migrations, there's two sections. There's the tenant migrations, and then there's the landlord migrations. The landlord migrations are at the root of migrations, and then tenant has its own folder. Tenant migrations obviously are enacted upon the tenant databases, all of them, and then the migrations that are at the root of migrations are enacted upon the landlord database.
But there's no explicit way that this is connected to the model.
No,
Right, no, there's no direct connection. They're just separate thing and they run separately.
Dave, you bring up a shortcoming that's been something that's been kind of on my mind recently, in that when you stack this many migrations, you do not have a clear view. Well, number one, you have to continually run this many migrations when you start up new people, which is problematic when it gets when your migration list gets really long. So there is a command that dumps the entire schema, and I would like it's something that I would like for us to address, having a more clear schema in our actual code. And I think I have a way to do it, but it's nothing that we have implemented right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to relate this to my existing knowledge. Also, I want to challenge people to actually ask questions that they don't get, because you guys are doing a lot more development than I am. Actually, you guys are doing development. I'm not. I should not be the one trying to ask all the questions. Yes, you will sound stupid. Yes, you will be in places where you don't understand stuff. It's the whole point of this. Ask questions, sound stupid, so that we all are better and we all figure things out.
Sounds good. So Donnie asks, so models only contain user editable fields? Are the other fields, timestamps, etc., filled by a helper? Exactly, Donnie. Yes. Created at and updated at are, if they are present on the table, Laravel will update them automatically when you perform touches. So when you perform creation of a record, updating a record, it will touch the necessary timestamps and update them to the latest time. And there's this trait here. You can see it on your company model too, the soft deletes trait. If soft deletes is present as a trait on this company model, and the company model also has a deleted at timestamp, that will be updated too when it is deleted. So almost all of our models on our backend use soft deletes. Even though we don't have a way to recover them yet, we still use soft deleting.
Let's point out for all the XPressEntry people, you do not have to manually request data that has a deleted at with a value, or that has a deleted at equals null. Okay, to explain soft.
So let's go into that. So soft deleting is the idea that instead of you want to remove, hard deleting is you want data gone from the database. Soft deleting means that in each table you want soft deleted, you add a column called the deleted at column. When most of the time, for all records which you want to appear in your queries, the deleted at column is null. So that means that you're basically adding an extra where statement to almost all of your regular queries that are saying, oh, grab all this data, yada, yada, when deleted at is null, to make sure that you're grabbing all of the non-deleted records. But when you do delete a record, it's going to set a timestamp at the time that that record was deleted. The reason column so that it is potentially recoverable. You can undelete a record as opposed to it just being gone from the database and you lost forever. We don't have a way in our system to recover those deleted records yet, to undelete a record. That is something that we need to work on, but we do have the database set up right now to do that. So a deleted at column is going to allow your records to be undeleted by setting a timestamp instead of removing a row from the database. Let's see what else is here.
And
Kelly
the point
says,
that on that real quick, the point that I wanted to make sure was clear for all of you XPressEntry folks who are used to throwing a where statement on every single query that you do that removes the deleted at records, Laravel does that automatically. Laravel will return only records that do not have the deleted at flag set. Unless you specifically request on the model, it's with trashed. You'll do a model where whatever your where statement is, and you add with trashed, and then it will return all rows that are deleted. There you go. Thank you, MM. So you have to specifically request it.
Could you send the docs for soft delete trait?
Yeah.
Is that a
Kelly,
is that a Laravel thing or like you guys built as a helper into the Laravel framework?
It's a Laravel thing.
Oh, interesting.
Built with the framework.
Yeah, and Alex, then how it Laravel taken like is deleted? I mean the table name, like is it a predefined table name for Laravel? Like
it's column. Yeah, it's deleted.
Yeah, sorry.
It uses it uses the standard created at, updated at, deleted at.
So every table would contain that.
Just like we have an XPressEntry already. So good job on the XPressEntry team for formatting it correctly.
All right. Moving on, Kelly asks, maybe a question for later, but how does testing work when you need to test against both XPtrack console? Yeah,
and specifically for database, related queries, right?
Do you want me to take this one, Brady?
Yeah, go ahead. You're probably better suited.
So we deploy to xptrack.com first for most things. So we deploy to our hosted system first. Then we take that code and that testing happens. One of our testers will actually run that code against the web console, against XPressEntry, and usually he'll identify that there are some column mismatches, because if we added anything to our hosted system, obviously XPressEntry had not added those yet. So generally, we deploy to the hosted system first, then we take a pull from our new master that we just deployed, and we start testing that against XPressEntry Web Console. So the idea is, in the next week after we deploy to our hosted system, we try to get it deployed into the Web Console branch. Now, that takes, if there's any database items that were done on the hosted system, now XPressEntry has to add them. So what Nathaniel will do, or what I will do, is add the database changes to XPressEntry at this point, and we'll make any other tweaks that might need to happen just because of the architecture change. And we'll deploy that to a different master branch, which is the master web console branch, which starts once that's pushed to master web console, then that is pushed off and deployed to an XPressEntry installer. So it's done in 2 steps. There's testing done at the hosted level, and then once it's done there, we push it to the web console level and it's tested there.
Got it. I think we definitely got to talk about, obviously, future deployments with XPressEntry team members starting to work on Laravel for customer items, right? And what that process looks like. That's not a discussion for now, but things that we probably need to discuss on what that may look like.
Sounds good. Donnie also asks, is there a situation where fillable fields are different on a user role basis? Not directly, not in the context of a model, at least. So this fillable will be static throughout the cycle of your whole request. If you don't want to allow certain people to update certain columns, that's going to be defined in something we'll talk about later on, which is our middleware and our request. So the request is going to define form validations, and then middleware is going to outline what that user has the ability to do. Let's see if there's anything else. Srijith asks, so does that mean that model is only used for populating data to views? Not exactly. The model class is also used for, as you can see here, it's used for building relationships within itself to other models. You can define database queries, either reusable queries or single-use queries that you're going to want to perform on this table. You could perform some database logic, so conditional update statements, conditional query statements, things like that. All of those things are more than welcome to go inside of your model. Talked about soft deleting, talking about some pro otter plans. Nice. Chris, you got a question on models?
Yeah, real quick. The models also update the data, right?
Models do also update the data, yes.
They're not just a view, they're how we update and modify the data as well.
Indeed, yes, but almost all of the things can actually, Alex or MM, drop the models documentation in the chat. Almost all of that is going to be defined by Laravel. So we will use a lot of, or Eloquent more so, we will use combine a lot of Eloquent queries together, build more of these reusable query functions. That is more so within the scope of the code that we write. But most of these updates are going to be performed just using these methods that Laravel gives us, if that makes sense. We're not going to be overriding that very frequently or expanding upon it. Okay, cool. Next up, if everybody wants to navigate to views. So right now I'm looking at a file called company.blade.php. What a blade.php file is it's really Laravel mixed with HTML. So it provides to you basically just raw HTML. But within that, as you can see, there's all of these little @ tags and this section tag, these include blocks to include other partials. For anyone who's unfamiliar with a partial is basically just a smaller chunk of HTML code, which is designed to be put inside of a bigger block. So we have a top bar, which is like a form loader, and then we have an actions top bar. That is shared across many different places. So in an effort to not write out the HTML, the structure for that top bar every single time, we put it inside of a partial and we just import that every single time we need it. Same with something like the CSRF field. CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. It's basically a matter of security, web security. It's a field we want to include on all of our forms, but it's also included in our headers, so we don't really need it. But that is also accessible here through other Blade syntaxes. So really when you see .blade.php, you're embedding HTML with some special Laravel exclusive functionality. And if someone could drop documentation on that in the chat, that would be super, super awesome. We have a special naming convention with how we name our files because really, from our modules perspective, we really only have two views we want to look at. We have index pages and we have form pages. So anything that starts with plural snake case is going to be our index view. So if you look inside of your directory, I'll pull it up here. Let's look inside. Let's close all this. I'll navigate back to modules. I will go to company views. We have this companies.blade.php. That will be our index view. And then our singular snake case name will be our form view. So going back, we have this company.blade.php. That's going to be our form. We use Bootstrap for a CSS framework. Bootstrap documentation in the chat, please. Someone could help me out. I could spend so long talking about Bootstrap and CSS and how it really applies. But basically, for anyone who's unfamiliar, within building HTML, you can add something called a class to your elements. So HTML, if anybody is super unaware, which some of you may be, HTML or hypertext markup language is the way that you build the front end structure of a website in something called a DOM or DOM. And you use all of these different elements, which can be nested within one another. So we have elements called form, which outline a form structure. We have input elements, which outline, I'm going to go back one. We have input elements, which output of inputs from checkboxes, number inputs, most of the time text inputs or hidden inputs. We have labels which go on top of an input. And I would say the most important element in HTML is something called a div. Div really provides an empty element for other elements to be inside. It's just a wrapper. Within HTML are these things called classes. Classes are things which you can apply to these HTML elements to give them certain styles and also give them certain relationships in the front end. As you can see, I have this div class with a form row and row classes. These form row and row classes are going to allow everything inside this to act as part of a row of a form. And then the divs below have this form group and this call MD6. Those are basically going to set their widths. So this is going to take up 6 columns as Bootstrap would define it. And this input is going to take up 6 columns as Bootstrap would define it. That's the super HTML for Dummies way to do it. Again, I think we'll probably have another one of these when it comes to front-end development, because that's just a whole nother ball game. But one of the things which I think is most important if you are familiar with this form is you'll notice that this form, all of these inputs right here, except for this first input at the top, have no data inside of them. There's no value attribute set for any of these inputs. That's how we want it to be done. So we're not loading data we're not loading, no loading of data from the model for your form. All of these fields are going to be empty. I know you guys are going to have some questions on this. I believe Donnie asked a question, and I think Alex may have answered it. So index is the grid when you click on a module on the left. Form is the specific module form for a single record. So yeah, let's just display this. We can actually look at this for companies. If we're looking in Telarus.xptrack.com, this is our index page right here. Basically our view of, okay, what record do we want to look at? We could see a list of all of our records and all of these columns, which are defined in the model. All of these columns defined in the model. Format structure of these is defined in our model. We'll look inside of here, and then this is our form. Basically, within this form, within the loading of this form, there are two requests happening. There's one request which actually grabs the form itself, which is the HTML and the structure of the form, and then along with that, it's going to send the data of the form separately. So whatever gets filled into any of these fields. So the form is the place where we do our data manipulation. The index is the place where we look at our data lists and possibly do sorting, filtering, etc. Hope that solves your question, Donnie. If not, ask another one. How do we pass parameters to the view? That's a great question. So that's a little bit more of the, let me open up. This was actually here. That's a little bit more of the Laravel magic. So if we look inside of here in our base controller, we have this generate view, which is a service we have defined here to basically build out a view with everything that we need. Under the hood, this is calling a Laravel view make, which is basically passing in all of these attributes in right here into the view. And within your view, you can just use these directly. There's a specific syntax to doing this. Alex or Amim, could you guys drop documentation in the chat on the view syntax and rendering views in Laravel? Really, for the most part, you guys won't have to worry about any of this, except for actually building out in your company.blade.php, except for actually building out the fields inside of here. Almost all of our, one shortcoming of our app for sure is almost all of our index views. So our plural snake case views look the same. That's our company's blade. We can look at our users.blade. It's a little bit different. It has a couple of filters right here, but for the most part, it's largely the same. Something we're trying to address in the future, but we have tools, which I will share with you when we start our challenge, which will actually make it so you don't have to touch this plural file at all. Any other questions on, thank you so much, Amim and Alex, for kind of being in the chat and providing the documentation, because that's really a lot of the stuff that I don't really necessarily have the time to go over or have memorized to the best of my ability. So thank you guys for picking up that slack for me. Moving on, back in our modules directory, we go to modules company and then our resources directory. We have something in there called the company details resource. Resources are a different part of our V or view component of our MVC architecture, but they are used to format the JSON side of things. So back to talking about resources, for the vast majority of you, this is going to be found in modules, into company, and then into resources. You'll find this details resource.php. Really what this does is it prepares model data for the front end in terms of JSON formatting. Takes a PHP array and using Laravel magic in the back end and some of the core functions of this JSON resource that the details resource extends, converts this into JSON when sending it to the front end.
I'm sorry, Brady. Do I need to switch to a different branch to get to this? Because I do not see this company details resources.
On stage?
I'm looking at models.
Dave, pull the latest.
Pull the latest on stage.
Company. I just pulled this yesterday.
Yep, do it again.
Do it again.
Brady just finished a reorg.
Okay.
It got pushed after you left. Yeah.
We said we've been needing to do this anyways, and it makes it so much cleaner for everybody to see. So let's do it now.
And Chris, just so you know, if you don't have this pulled, you can actually go into the GitHub and hit. This is actually a really cool. Brady, can you just show this on your side? Can you go into Chrome GitHub? Go to your GitHub account on this repo.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in here and you just hit dot, period. It gives you a full VS Code editor that you can actually use from your web browser. And you can look at the different files directly from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just follow the log. I'm not gonna do all the login stuff because I want to preserve network bandwidth. But yeah, that's really cool.
So, if you're ever on a machine that you want to get access to, it's like, oh, there's this bug. I'm at a public Wi-Fi thing. I connect to my laptop. I don't have, or somebody else's laptop, but I can log in. You could just do dot. You can actually edit in VS Code. You can commit, and just a super powerful thing directly from the browser. And it's literally just typing the period from a GitHub repo.
Pretty awesome. Okay, back to resources. These are really just, as you can see, this is just a PHP array, which functions similar. It could be used as a single dimensional array. It could be used as a hash map. Alex or Amim, if one of you guys wants to drop documentations on PHP arrays, they're super powerful, but they're also super memory expensive. You could do almost anything you want with them. Almost any type of data structuring you need, you can build with an array and modify with an array. Also, all of our front-end data transformations will be performed here. So as you can see on these bottom two lines, I'm using this date-time helper, which is something that we've built, and its static method convert UTC to user zone. All of our timestamps are going to be stored in UTC. So when we're converting that to the time zone of our front-end user, that's all going to be done here within the resources. Any questions regarding the resource? Let me look at the chat, see what people are putting in there.
I just got what I think is a dumb question.
Sure.
Is there any reason why we couldn't have put this stuff into the model so that when we're going in and out anywhere that we're looking at created at or updated at, we automatically deal with the user zone and it gets converted to UTC on the back end. So we're not forcing it. We don't have this explicit force everywhere.
Sure, but this is also Laravel best practice. That's why we followed this the way we do. Laravel wants these to be separated just to ensure, because this is mainly about making sure that the data we're sending to the front end is data that the front end needs and only that. Models actually have or provide their own toArray function, which will take all of the model stuff and convert it to a PHP array. And you could just call this directly from the details resource to access just the model to an array, but most of the time that will require more data than the model actually needs. And a lot of times, if those data have to do with something like an associated record, you will need to provide associations in here and things like that. Let me see if I can provide a good example of one, which is maybe a little more complex. We can do user
items. Items are users.
Item details resource, or is it it's
Yeah.
inventory item details resource?
I think it's inventory item.
Inventory details. Inventory item. I think this is one of our ones that's all screwed up with the naming convention. Details item. I can do a catalog item details resource.
That'll work.
Details resources. Right here, this is some examples of grabbing associated data. So one thing that's very confusing when you're working within the catalog items details resource, the context of this actually refers to the model that you pass into the details resources. So we're grabbing the ID from the model, the model's display name attribute, which is a custom attribute that we define. You can actually have nested resources. So here we have a catalog item inspection interval resource, and we're taking all of the inspection intervals from the model, passing it into here, and it's going to build a J array or an array of JSON objects to put inside of this inspection intervals key in the front end JSON. Right here for this category name, we're going to take this, we're going to grab our related category through this category data getter, and then we're going to grab the name from the category data. This question mark is just going to ensure that if the category data is null, this will also be null and not throw an exception. It's a null safe operation. So these are kind of some other things you could do within the details resource. And why, Dave, it's a little bit different than just doing model conversions in the back end. It's really database specific. We can look at where category data is defined somewhere right here. Yeah, Dave.
Sticking with this, if you look at the resources directory, you've got a catalog item detail resource and a details resource.
That's not supposed to happen. I think that's an anomaly, and that's something we need to refactor out because that shouldn't be happening. I'm sure that one of them is not used.
And like one is a shortened version of the other.
Maybe that is not how we should be doing our naming conventions.
Okay.
So here is that relationship. Yet another piece of Laravel magic. If you were able to, if you for some reason skimmed through the associations part of the documentation for Laravel that we sent in the chat, you could see that this category data method is actually converted, and Laravel magically knows that if you access it as an attribute without parentheses at the end, it's going to grab this category model. So that is where category data is defined. Thank you, Alex, for asking that in the chat. This is a real world example of where we use an association. Suba also asked the question, does this resource stand in between view and model? Alex and I actually, when we were going over these slides, we actually disagreed on this implementation, on this kind of theoretical idea. I think that details resources are part of the view, considering that what they do is they take model data from an existing model and convert it into something that the front end uses to parse into a JSON object. Alex thought that it kind of blurred the lines in between since we're using the model directly to build that JSON information. So, Suba, that's a good question. I guess it's a little bit up to your interpretation of model view controller. I don't think everything in here is quite as concrete as we want it to be. But I would say this falls into more of, it utilizes the model, but this is part of the view piece of the model view controller. Anyone have any other questions on resources? Cool. Next up, we're going to talk about requests. So moving along in your modules directory, you will have modules company requests, company request.php. This is also not going to be present if you don't have the latest code pulled or you aren't looking through GitHub's VS Code in browser editor or something like that. But you can also still find it. It still has the same name. It'll just be in a different location. So what are requests? Requests are based on Laravel's form request. And really what this does is it binds validation to an existing HTTP request, which is also noted as that request object, which we talked about connected to the controller. Laravel has a very unique validation syntax. This one has a very simple one, but let me show you one which might be a little bit more complex. If we pull up VS Code here, and we go to the request.php, you can actually have multiple requests within. Yeah, Dave?
Brady, I usually think of validations as a way to check data on the way going in. I don't usually think of validations as a check on things going out.
This is on its way in. So let me kind of explain how this works. Again, it's more Laravel magic. So when let's take this method right here. This is within our base controller. So everybody can open up their base controller, go to line 129, look at the store function. Raise your hand when you have that up, I guess, because this is kind of a piece of Laravel magic that will I agree, will be very, very confusing if you're not actively looking at the code. With
Control P base controller to get there.
Yeah, Control P base controller.
Is there a good way to get to store in a file?
Control F. Store.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I can do that. But I was just wondering if there was a faster way to.
There might be. I'm not sure.
Okay. I want to read. This is something that I don't say. I say all the time, but I still don't say it enough. If you understand how to use your editor, you will speed up your development time by a factor of 2 in terms of multi-caret editing, in terms of finding, in terms of navigation. It is the key. Knowing all the benefits of what your editor can do is super powerful, and none of us know as much as we should.
Okay. Is everybody? It seems that most folks are at that point. For preservation of time, I'm just going to keep it pushing on this. 4. We're also looking at the store user request right here, but everybody's mainly looking at this store. So in this first line at line 132, request instance is equal to app this store request. As you guys may have recalled before, I'm going to look back in my slides so we can kind of have a multi view of what's going on. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to controllers. Everybody looking at this controller, as you can see, you have this store request placed right here. This is going to provide a class that your controller is going to use to bind to the current request that it received from the user. And when that request is bound, it's going to apply validations to it. So if we go back to our requests right here, when you hit that store request, I'm just going to have the company request up right here. So company request, just so we can kind of get a little double view right here. When we hit this right here on the company's controller, it's going to say, okay, take the current, use this app, which is basically going to find That's Laravel's special way of saying if you did something funny to bind this, that it's honestly so difficult to explain. This line of code basically says we're going to take the request that we received from the user. We're going to take whatever class from the store request, and we're going to bind it to that request. When that request is bound, this rules method is called. Within this rules method is a bunch of different validation rules. So as you can see, we have this helper right here, which will basically, it's a convenient shorthand that we defined to give us a way to grab a validation for fields which are required or fields which we will only receive some of the time that could be nullable. So it's going to take this rules, call it, and then pass in all of these attributes from the request into each element of this rules array. So it's going to take the name. It's going to say, okay, this name is required. It has to be a string, and it has to be unique amongst the companies with the same name, without the same ID, and with a null deleted at. Again, I don't know if this syntax was dropped in the chat already, but the syntax definitely takes some getting used to. It's convenient when you become an expert at it, but it's very hard to become an expert at. But then we'll keep moving on. It's basically going to say code, oh, sometimes we'll get this. And all of these other validations are practically empty. It's basically saying, hey, if we see country, we expected that it could be there. If we see address, we expected that it could be there as well. So really, this line at line 132 is the key to all of this, because it's Laravel's magic of saying, we're going to take this request we got in from the user, which is already formatted into a request object, and we are going to bind this form request object, this company request, to it. When that request is bound, these rules are going to be thrown in there, and it's going to validate all of these fields. And then if something goes wrong in the validation, it's actually not even going to process the rest of this code. It's going to spit back out with a 422 error, unprocessable content, going to return to us the errors that we received, and it's our job to show those on the front end. I really hope you guys have questions for that, because that gets very, very perplexing. Riley, I see your hand raised. Yep, shoot.
Yeah, I have a quick question. How did you know that those rules specifically are getting bound when you call that line? How do you know it's those rules?
Because the name, it's really just fancy naming. So when you bind, basically inside of this app call right here, it's going to take this object. It's going to say, okay, we're binding this request to this form request. But because Illuminate, which is the base, which is Laravel, because Laravel knows that this is a form request, it's going to say, oh, okay, let's call this rules method. And let's get the rules for this, and let's validate everything. It's magic. Basically, Laravel knows behind the scenes that when you're binding a form request object via the app helper to the app instance, it's going to know that it needs to be validated with the rules in the rules function. Yes, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
MM just answered my question. Are saying this is just saying these must exist, or these are the form how they like when we look up the data. This is what must exist. This isn't how the data itself is formatted.
This is how.
So like if state needed to be two letters all caps, you wouldn't put that in here.
You could put that in here. We just don't.
What's the right place to put that? It's not here, so it's somewhere else.
It will be here. We just do not have that validation. I think you're actually pointing out a flaw in we just have weak validation on our companies. But let me try to find something. Alex,
right. I wasn't asking for this particular case. I was just for other things, right? Like email has to be in an ISO format.
All of
numbers
that
have
would
to
go in
be
here.
Plus something. Right. Okay.
All of that would go in here.
Well, hold on. Are we talking about checking to validating that it is in that format, or are we talking about, let's say we get lowercase ca and we want to change it to uppercase ca?
Is in that format.
Okay, that would go here.
Yeah. So yeah, if we're checking for a format, if there's anything we want to, basically, we're talking about at the controller level. If there's anything that we do not, anything where the data is bad and we do not even want the controller to process it, we don't want to go through any other app logic, it goes in here. If there's something tricky where it's like, oh, there's some sort of database logic, but it'll spit out if this thing goes wrong, then we will put it someplace else. But for 90% of our validations, they're going to go in here. Any other questions on this? Let me check the chat, see what people got. Documentation on the rule syntax. Did we send that already? Yeah, it should be, Nathaniel, should be in AMMs, which has docs/9.x/validation. That's the syntax of all of these rules.
Cool, got it.
And there are also ways to define custom rules, which should be in that documentation. We use some of those sometimes. In case you have a rule which is maybe a little bit more complex than this, and you want to just define it in its own class, there's a way to do that, which the documentation walks through. Any other questions? Let's see. Thank you, Ammon, for bringing that to the front. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I was saying that Laravel has a lot of magic. There's a lot of things about it which it just kind of does in the background, and it's almost designed, I would argue, and I think Alex, you would agree with this, that Laravel is meant to be understood at a high level and like experienced at a high level more than a low level. It's almost designed to not ask questions. Would you agree, Alex?
Sometimes the questions need to be answered, though.
I agree.
Yeah,
but
it takes a little bit of understanding of how things are going between the different items. And I think that a better diagram, or a more specific diagram from how to jump from file, how it's jumping from file to file, which might seem like magic at first. Once you have the diagram of how it jumps from file to file, then I think it'll make more sense. So let's get that built out.
Sure.
I'll get that built out. Or I think AMM actually already might have posted one. So we'll go off that.
Sure. Yeah. Again, the controller all brings it together, but there is a lot of magic behind the scenes, even behind the scenes of the controllers. And yeah, that really outlines the bulk of our modules directory. Those are the pieces that are those are all of the pieces that are required for the vast majority of modules that we have. Any questions? Let's see if there's any more. Things that are obfuscated should be clearly documented in code, because without clarity or repeat exposure, programmers will do things wrong. Agreed. You should tell the people at Laravel that too.
I have control over you guys. I don't have control over them.
I know you do. I was just having some fun.
If we can put comments in there that explain, this is exactly where comments are useful, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm preparing details. Details equals this dot model : prepare details. Like, that comment's useless. But a comment that actually talks about how to, like, what is going on in terms of, like, by calling this code, this is going to drive us through the base controller's store code, is actually a useful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because that clarifies what's going on. As opposed. Yeah.
You know, I agree with you, Dave. And I think all of us here at least should agree with you. What VS Code extensions do we need? Nathaniel, I'll get into that. I will, as you guys are working on your challenge, I'll be sending those. I'll kind of be looking through my directory, and I can send you what I have. I think everything I have is free except for one thing, which is $25, and most of you don't need it. So Yep, I'll send those after we look at some other important files which are not in the modules directory. These kind of encompass more generic functionalities, things that we share across multiple modules, or things that kind of don't necessarily pertain to one module, or maybe not every module has them. So we kind of parse them out and do them in a more standard Laravel-y way. We start out with middleware. Let's everyone navigate to this middleware. So this is going to be in our, we're going to now be transitioning mainly to our app directory. So I'm going to close all this. If we go, I'm going to go back to the top. If we go to app, HTTP, and then middleware, and then right now I'm looking at the verify CSRF token middleware, which is actually, it's an interesting case because it extends a default Laravel middleware. But yeah, if everybody could look at this code, I'm also going to have it up on the screen, but it'd be nice to kind of have a visual in front of you if you want to be looking at VS Code and not a cruddy PowerPoint screenshot. So middleware, Donnie's been curious this entire presentation. What is middleware? These are functions passed through the route before it hits the controller. Used primarily to control authentication, different kinds of protection like CSRF, validation, and more. So technically, those form requests we were just talking about were a form of middleware because they are designed to be stopped either before the controller or at the beginning of the controller to make sure that we're not going to be touching the database before we do any of these special things. I'm pretty sure all of our middleware is defined in app HTTP middleware. And I kind of want to give you guys a little example and a little bit of an overview of how middleware is chained together. So we're actually going to divert from this file. This is just an example of verifying CSRF tokens. Yeah, Alex?
Quick clarification. The requests are actually at the controller level.
Yes.
Requests should be handled at the beginning of the controller. So what he was showing you in the store function was actually in base controller, and it's the first thing that you do is you validate the request. So the request lives, if there's the order of things, it goes middleware, so through the route, middleware, then controller, and then in the controller the request hits. The middleware is actually happening before it hits the controller at all.
Okay. So yeah, Dave, that's a good point. I should talk about.
I shared a lifecycle, request lifecycle in SVC file. You can open it in browser and see the lifecycle here, so you can easily understand why and the request goes where in which area.
Okay, yeah, Dave, you bring up a good point. Let's talk about CSRF and kind of the exact implications of this middleware. So CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. Really, what we need to protect against is someone from another site basically using one of our routes for our backend to access data on their site and doing something malicious with it. So maybe there's some misleading URL which actually will redirect or have an AJAX request, which is an asynchronous request, which posts to our site to do something malicious, put something nasty in our database or something like that. So what we do is we actually, whenever we send a request down or have a response back to the client, we send this CSRF or XSRF token. This token is what we use to verify that we actually are looking at a page that we got from our site, so we should be allowed to communicate back upwards. Basically, what this middleware is doing is it's looking at basically right when we get the request, we're checking in this middleware cookie. You can see at this line, cookie token equals request cookie XSRF. And then we're basically doing some checks on that token to make sure that this token equals what we got from our site to begin with. Basically making sure that people aren't trying to access our data from a place other than places we allow them to. Nathaniel asks, is this related to CORS or CORS? CORS is related, but that stands for cross origin request signature. Really what it allows us to do is kind of give us some ways to bypass these CSRF tokens. So kind of, Nathaniel, but really it's giving us a way to go around this. The vast majority of the time, we're going to be looking at the CSRF token to make sure that the requests that we are getting are coming from our site itself, not from some other malicious attacker that's trying to send data up to us. Does that make sense? Could people raise hands if they're clear on what CSRF is? This is kind of like a high level web thing that is really just kind of a specific example of why middleware is important, because we would not want to do any database manipulation before we know that this is all valid.
I just want to add an example why CSRF is not needed. Let's say I have a form here, and there is a route to post the data in that form, and I should not be able to use that route in a different site. Let's say here we have a user create route, and if I can use it in a WordPress site to create the user, then the CSRF violates. So we shouldn't let the WordPress create the user from his site. So that's why it's called cross-site request forgery.
Yep, that's a great point, Amon. Okay, great. I want everybody to. Now we're kind of going to redirect our attention because I want to explain more of a medium to low level of how our middleware is defined and how it is applied to our routes. Middleware is applied at the route level, and it is applied using strings, which are defined in something. Everybody navigate to, I believe it is in here. Let me make sure. So everybody navigate to app http kernel.php. Go ahead and raise your hand when you get there. This is really important. There's multiple kernels. There's an app console kernel.php, and there's an app http kernel.php. Make sure you're on the app http one, or else you will be very, very confused. Okay, it seems like we got Mohsin, Chris Saman, you guys there? Dave, you there? Yvonne just got there. Yep, Mohsin's there. Let's all check Lath. Did you make it? Sweet. Sounds good. Looks like everyone's there. All right. Let us start at the class declaration. As you can see, there's a bunch of use statements because all of our middleware needs to be imported here. Basically, what the kernel does is it gives us a place to define middleware, groups of middleware, and where this and how this middleware should be run. All of these naming conventions are standardized by Laravel. Alex, I think, could you send some documentation on this below? I'm going to walk through it, honestly, to the best of my ability, because I think this is pretty primitive to understanding how middleware works. But could you send some docs? That'd be super awesome. Let's start here at line 69. This protected middleware property right here. This Laravel provides a comment. This is the application's global middleware stack. Basically, what this means is all of these middleware classes are going to be applied to every single route of our application all of the time. Meaning that every single time we go through a route, we're going to go through this trust proxies middleware, which is going to handle proxying. We're going to handle our cores. We're going to check and make sure that we are not in maintenance mode. We're going to validate and make sure that the size of our post request is within the limitations of our application. Things like that. Those are applied to everything. Then if we go below to line 87, we have another one, middleware groups. This basically gives us a way to take middlewares which are commonly run together and run them in the order that we define here. So we have a web middleware group. This group is going to be applied to all of our web classes, and it is going to run after all of these application middleware. And all of these are run in order. So it's going to trust the proxies, and then it's going to handle the cores. Then it's going to check for maintenance mode, so on and so on and so forth. And then if the web middleware group is applied to the route, it's going to check and see if the installer is complete. It's going to encrypt the cookies, add the queued cookies, start your session, share errors from the session, verify the CSRF, which we just saw. It's also going to go to login verify, which is one of our middlewares to verify a login, everything like that. We also have a bunch of middleware groups here. We can also nest middleware groups inside each other. So as you can see in our common middleware, we're actually going to go through our web group first, right here.
Sorry to interrupt. Could people put their hands down because it's very confusing, unless you have an actual question?
Yeah, let's, yep, with Chris. It's going to go through our web. And then down here, we have another protected attribute right here, which is going to give us a string name for a middleware class. Basically, it makes it easy for, it's basically a convenient way so that you do not have to import this middleware in other places or have a long, path or namespace declaration. You could just use this string. And again, all of this is applied in our routes. So we can look in this common, we have this web, we have this auth middleware, which is provided by Laravel. We also have this valid menu, which is defined right here. It's actually going to go through our sidebar menu middleware. And then it'll go through initialize tenancy by domain, which is defined right here in our route middleware. As you can see, lots of custom naming. But basically what this is doing is it's a way to take each route and make sure it goes through a necessary number of steps before it hits the controller. And those steps can do anything. Most of them have to do with authorization, but a lot of them have to do with request formatting or even response formatting at some level. All of that is handled. We can look in here. Alex, do you have an idea of like a middleware that's maybe on the simpler side so we can kind of demonstrate the next functionality in passing middleware into each other?
Is partitions too complicated?
Let's see. Web partitioning middleware. Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard. Every piece of middleware has this special handle function. Handle is the thing that actually handles the processing of your middleware. As you go through the chain of command, Laravel is going to look at this function and call it on every piece of middleware in the order that they are defined. And in order to move on to the next piece of middleware, you're actually going to you have a request. This is the request that you received. And then another parameter, which is next, which is a closure. Closures I talked about before are functions that are passable. You're going to say next, call the next closure on this request. So that's some funny syntax. You'll look at this and be like, what does this mean? It's because this is actually a function and you want to pass in the request you received into this function. So this is really simple. This helper is going to see, check if the application is partitioned. If it's not, we're going to send this to the next piece of middleware. This is going to be present in every middleware. This is how, again, they are all chained together. Anybody who has a question on this, raise your hand. I want to make sure that this is clear. honestly, most of the time for simple feature fixes, you're not going to be touching the middleware stuff, but it's nice to know how it works. So sometimes when you do run into a middleware bug, you can check your kernel and say, okay, what order is this running in? What class am I actually looking at? Where do I actually have to look for middleware? All of that is defined in the kernel. And then when you're looking at your middleware classes, you want to check the handle function. That's where everything is going to be called. Yeah, Dave.
So I'm looking at, let's go to a different file, go to route service provider.php.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one that I pulled out of.
Dave, I'll be honest, service providers are an entirely different concept.
And just bear with me for a sec. This is not, I don't think this is rocket science. So do Control F web.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows route middleware web.
Mm-hmm.
So what I don't get is so this looks like you're looking at a hash going onto the middleware piece, but if you go back to that kernel file,
mm-hmm.
I don't see the connection between the middleware object and the middleware groups where web seems to be defined. So where is that connection made?
That connection is made. So upon every request, it's going to take this kernel class and parse out all of these attributes. And then it's going to be able, from the route level, discern which middleware to go through. So we can actually look at this. It's probably clearer to look at this editor layout, 2 columns. We can look at this in the company routes, which we were looking at before.
Again, my question remains. So now you've got this route middleware, and you're looking at a hash entry for common, which is fine. How did that's actually getting driven through middleware groups? Where does middleware groups get tied as a hash entry into the protected middleware hash that starts off the kernel? So it's very clear that middleware is at the top, and it's protected middleware, and I just don't see where middleware groups gets connected to middleware, which is this hash. This gets where things get driven through the middleware. I understand the concept. I just don't understand the connection.
I'll be honest, I don't understand the low level of the connection either. Laravel does all of this in the back.
Under the hood in Laravel, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Laravel handles all of this behind the scenes. It just provides you.
This is something that's happening default Laravel, that middleware groups is a hash that's, because it doesn't look like middleware is an object in this kernel piece outside of this protected thing at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just trying to understand where. I can see that they're connected somewhere, but it's not clear that what is. So this is a Laravel thing, then. It's not
100%. Yep, this is not something that we built on top of the framework. The framework wants you to build middleware this way by using your kernel and defining basically magic strings, which you can place inside of your routes in order to define which middlewares you're going to walk through.
I love magic strings as much as nobody.
Yep.
All right. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I wasn't lying when I was talking about the syntactic sugar, guys. It's everywhere, and it is most likely confusing. There's some questions. Does the ordering of the middleware includes matter here? Yes. So So basically it's going to be recursive in its order. It's going to start with all of the global middleware. This will run first in order as it was declared in the array. And then for all of the middleware groups applied, each of these groups or single middlewares will run in order. Wait, Alex already answered that, but I answered it twice.
Yeah, so just to be clear, if you look at the route file on the right-hand side, you have to define the groups when you're defining the routes, either on the route itself or in the routing group. What you're looking at here is a route group on line 9. Everything under it has that middleware applied to it. Also notice that it says without middleware. That means that we're saying use all the common but exclude enabled features.
Enable.features, and enable.features is defined right here in this enable feature middleware, which we frequently skip when it's something that's directly Ajax related, where we know that if you got to that route in the first place, you're able to use it. Memory class actually is explained in this one. Yeah, this is, again, just wanted to walk through some of the Laravel magic. There's lots of magic strings, which are kind of hard to trace back, but app http kernel.php is going to be the source of everything. If you're having middleware related issues, this is where it's all going to lie. And the documentation for middleware should echo exactly what I just said. Doesn't seem to be any other questions in the chat, and we're getting towards the end of this. So let's keep pushing along. We're going to talk about services.
Brady, is that
what's up?
One quick question for me. Is that without middleware enabled thing just for optimization purposes, or is there a different purpose for it? Like it just you don't need to do the extra validation and slow yourself down.
Or a lot of times it will say like this middleware will fail on this request, but we want it to not fail, so we're going to skip it. Okay. So yeah, we're just like maybe these routes don't necessarily have an enabled feature linked to them, linked to their ability. So we just want to skip them and go to the next thing. That's really all this means. And then, of course, the group just means that this middleware stack that we have built here will apply to all of these routes. So you don't have to write middleware common without middleware enabled features on every single line. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
I've got another quick question.
Sure.
So the middleware stuff is generically going to be for the broad web app development side of things, as opposed to updating specific resources or specific actions for a user or a company. This is something that might be used for roles, or it might be used for proxies or higher level rules that are not necessarily app level rules.
Yep, it will be mostly, I would say almost all of our middleware does not relate to any specific module at all. All of these are kind of higher level things, but sometimes you will run into module level issues that kind of stem from a piece of middleware that has gone wrong. So it's nice to know how we got to that path in the first place.
A couple of examples of when we've had to add a new middleware. Workforce. When the workforce stuff was done, there was middleware added, but that's a new device syncing in a different way with the app. Another one was partitions. We needed everything needed to be scoped down, so there was middleware added for a partition that said when I log in, I only see specific bits of the data, not all of the data. So we had to scope it down, and that's done in the middleware because it's done before we want to hit the controller and start doing our GET request or start doing our database queries. So it scopes it to a lower set of data. Normally, Dave, you're right. Normally, for regular app fixes and add-ons, you're not going to add anything unless you have some bigger overarching feature attached to it.
Just for the people that are involved in Flutter development, what specifically, what specific things should they be aware of in interacting with mobile apps like Flutter? Like where would we see this middleware where would this middleware get adjusted for something like Express Tools or for
I have I can pull up the example for the workforce middleware and
Sure.
what we do in that
and
place.
why we use it differently.
And why we use it differently. Good question, Dave. Basically, the workforce middleware allows us to do two things. Number one is it allows us to use JWT token authentication, which is different than our standard session-based cookie auth or sending in a username and password and being authenticated that way, because we want someone, when they open up the app, to just be able to send a token in an API request and get that data back. Could everybody go to app http middleware workforce middleware.php. Raise your hand when you get there, I suppose. And we could kind of work through why this is special for a workforce related feature. All right, we got almost everybody waiting on Yvonne and Donnie, and I think they're working on it, and Laith. Laith, I know you wrote this, but look at it. Cool, everybody's there. So again, in our workforce middleware, we'll look at the handle method at line 19. This is where everything is run. At line 23, basically overview for people who aren't familiar with a mobile app or really authenticating a mobile app. Really, the key with authenticating on a mobile app is we only want to authenticate one time, but then after we authenticate, we want something we can store on our device that we can use to authorize our API requests so that we don't have to submit a username and password every single time, right? On the browser, most of the time we'll do that using a cookie, which relates to something called a session. That doesn't pertain necessarily to mobile development. We'll normally have a header in our request for authorization. So that's what we have right here. We'll grab this authorization header. We will use a auth service, and services I'll get into on this next slide coming up. Basically a worker class to validate this token. And this validation will spit out a user ID, which is the user tied to this request. If this fails, it will catch in the response, it will catch in this catch block down here and say it's unauthorized for a certain reason. And it will actually spit out a response and say, you are not authorized to view this because of whatever reason your validation failed. Next up on line 26, it will actually say, hey, we want this user ID that we got from this JWT token. We want the authorized user for this request on workforce related things in the future. So we will actually bind it or merge another attribute to our request instance using this request merge. So now every time we call request decoded user, this will give us something. This will give us the ID of the user that we are looking for. So this middleware is doing two things. Not only is it authorizing, but it's also providing useful information that workforce controllers are going to want, which is what user is actually looking for this data, what we need to scope this data down to this user, etc. And then, as you can see on line 31, it's saying go to the next middleware. Take this modified request that I just made and pass it along to the next middleware. Dave, is that a good example of kind of what you're looking for and how it's different from kind of how we would do it on our classic browser side?
It is. So how do we know that we're using the route that we're going for workforce middleware is getting routed to here? So it's pretty clear that validate tokens, looking at the database, saying, is this token the one that was validated for this user that's linked to the user ID? So that's clear that we've got this. It's clear how it passes from one to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So the workforce middleware should be hit out of kernel at some point, correct?
Indeed. So let's also, if you guys want to show this view, if you're in VS Code, you can go to View, Editor Layout, 2 columns. If you want to view things side by side, or you could view things top bottom. I'm on a wider screen, so I'm going to do side by side. Let us look at, we're going to go to modules, workforce, routes, workforce_routes.php. I'm feeling confident that everybody can know how to get there, but I'll just give you guys 10 seconds to get there. And if for some reason you can't, just blur it out.
Control P, workforce routes, PHP.
Cool. I'm assuming everybody's there. Let us go back to our kernel. And we will scroll down to line. Boom, 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 boom. Where is this defined? Where is this defined?
In the middle of route middleware, there's
So, yep. So right here, if we go to line 177 of route middleware, we will see this workforce string is magically bound to the workforce middleware, which is what we were just looking at. And if we go back to our workforce routes, we look at line 53, we can see that for all of these requests in this block, this workforce middleware will be applied at the very end. And then there's the group, and then all of the actual routes applied down here. So that means at the very end of the middleware cycle for each of these requests, we will pass through this handle function where we authorize based on the JWT, we decode that and merge the decoded user ID to the request for use later. So steps in the process: build the middleware, go to the kernel, define the magic string for it in the route middleware, and then use that magic in your routes using the middleware method, which registers your route.
Am I reading this correctly that workforce enabled is the is when workforce has already been validated, and workforce, the first workforce, is for actually doing the initial validation?
So workforce enabled actually checks to see if the feature is enabled for your tenant. So we want to kick you out. If you don't even have workforce set up, if it's not even configured on your side, we just want to kick you out before we try to do the validation, or else we're wasting our time with validation. So we're going to process that first, and then after we're going to try workforce.
Just as a naming convention, if I was looking at this coming into it, I would have said that workforce enabled should have been named is workforce enabled to clarify what it's actually checking, as opposed to workforce enabled. Is that just in terms of structurally, in terms of our naming convention, is there a reason why it was just called workforce enabled as opposed to is workforce enabled?
Not sure. Alex, I think in the documentation you sent about middleware, I think the preferred naming convention is actually this dot case and not the the camel case here.
No, Dave's right. Well, sorry, it is the dot case, but Dave's right. The class should be is workforce enabled. If you look at is admin below, is dot admin, that would be what we should be doing.
Sure. Yeah, I can get behind that.
And this is something that everybody should just be aware of. Like, if you make good choices in terms of how you name things, you make life so much easier for everybody else. Oh my goodness.
Agreed.
Because you look at workforce enabled, it's like, okay, are those all the routes now when workforce is enabled? So I can start doing all the workforce stuff. And so it'll send me down one path and then I have to recover saying, oh no, it's for this other purpose. So make sure you get your names as right as possible. And if you see names that look like they should be something else, suggest that we do it better.
I can get behind that, Dave. Thank you. Moving on, this should be probably the easiest for all of us to understand because I'm sure we've all dealt with a service of some kind. Services are just heavy or reused business logic. So they are PHP classes, which we use, which can be called from, they could be called from models, they could be called from controllers. There's really no predefined convention of where they are called from. It's just if there is going to be a lot of code, either pertaining to something that goes to one module, or if it pertains to multiple modules, we want it to go inside of a service. It keeps our models and controllers light and more readable. So certain things that we have services for, heavy actions like checking in and out items, all of the kind of logic we go through in the back end and, checking columns in the database and pulling all the information we need, all of that is done in a service. So that way from our controllers or our models, we're just calling in a service, we're calling a service and passing in what we need. These are found in the app services directory, or sometimes in some modules, if it is specific to the module, we will actually put it in the module itself. So modules, whatever module name and services, you'll find both in any place. Really, you could use these for whatever you want. Just if you have some heavy logic, think about, you probably want to put this in a service. Models can be heavier than controllers. Controllers you want to be as light as possible. But if you got some crazy stuff going on, just throw it in one of these. Anyone have questions on services? I'm sure we've all interacted with them.
Brady?
Yes?
You selected a nice piece of code with error in it. Can you remove start date and end date from the middle of that in the code? It's duplicated.
Start date and end date. Oh, how fun is that? Yeah, we can get rid of that. Thanks for noticing.
I just installed a PHP linter and it popped that up. So if you don't have if that somebody asks for useful plugins, I did the default Laravel and the default PHP all-in-one PHP support.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
it came up with that error. So there's a lot of things that by using the right plugins, you're going to make yourself have better. You're going to save yourself headache because you do something stupid.
Sure, Dave. Can you drop the name of that plugin in the chat while we move on?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we're talking about config or configurations. Really how these are structured. This one is an example, application setting.php. So this can be found, I'll just kind of skip through all of these so we can look in here. These are found in the config directory. You'll find at the top level config, and then there'll be a bunch of PHP files. All of these PHP files really simply just return an array. There's a special Laravel magic accessor for finding data in these config files, which is just config, and then it's a config method, and inside you pass in a string, which is file name dot array key. So let's say in this, I wanted to grab JSON file root path. I would type config, start a string, application setting dot JSON file root path. And this is global static configurations that applies to all instances of the app on XPT or web console. One of the main things we need to do here, and one of the primary uses for this, which we do not do, is to have messaging conditions for internationalization. So basically, instead of having plain strings to explain or have messaging in your application, you can actually go to the config and then you can pass in as part of a string or a substring what language you're using, and then you can grab the correct messaging from there. That is one example of where config is useful. But again, all of this config is static. Again, for modular development, you're not really going to be adding to this too much. But when you add to it, just know that it's going to be the same across every single instance of every app. So you're really only going to want to do it if it's something that you don't want to be a magic number or a magic string. Any questions on that? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Cool. We can move on. The last file I want to talk about, you guys have already interfaced with this when you were setting up, is our .env. This is going to be our environment configurations. This is the best way to switch between web console and XPtrack databases for the development side. And this is going to be unique to each system. And in case you wanted to add in case you needed to add something to this env, if you were doing some big non-modular feature change that needed some environment connection, let's say you were setting up a connection to a new service, you would define that in the .env.example, as all of you guys did when you were first setting up. You took this .env.example, copied it, renamed it to env, and then made the changes you need to do. Alex, would now be a good time for you to maybe take over and you can kind of talk about switching between web console and multi-tenant development and the env changes that need to happen there? Or would you want to do that a little bit later?
I think for time's sake, I think we need to get to the challenge. But basically, if you just look at the commented out section right there, uncomment that, comment out the block above it where it has db connection equals MySQL, and all the way down to db_password. It's a switch. So just switch the comments between those two, and you're going from your SQL Server database to your MySQL database.
Because
there are
Alex, I'm sorry.
Some other things that you need to do. I think I just want to put together a little guide that shouldn't be, it'll probably be one page on the different things to look for if it is not working, just like a troubleshooting guide.
Sweet. Awesome. Sounds good. I actually do have one more. I lied to you guys. I'm so sorry. We need to talk about jobs. Jobs are designed to be run asynchronously in production with a queue. This is, again, Alex, do we use delayed jobs? We use them for web console too, right? Not just XPtrack?
Emails. Yes.
Yeah. So anything that we don't want to be, because how PHP works is there's a request cycle, right? So every time Apache receives a web request, it's going to point to the PHP root. It's going to pass in request information, and it's going to give one PHP call. So PHP isn't a service that's constantly running. It only works in the scope of a request. But there are some things we want to happen outside of the scope of a request, such as email sends. Or maybe we have a big import that we want to work on over time, and we don't want the user to have to wait for that import to finish, or we want to delay it to work later when we're heavy on our database. We can put everything inside of a job and let it run asynchronously on a separate service. We use a service in production called Supervisor. Supervisor is basically able to have multiple threads of PHP, multiple different queue types, and load balancing. So we can run jobs as they need to be run, and that, along with Kubernetes, gives us a lot of flexibility on if we get slammed with a bunch of email sends or we get slammed with a bunch of imports, we can balance that out and make sure it doesn't slow down people's normal app life cycles when they're trying to work within the application. This can be run synchronous and asynchronous in development. I set everybody up to run their env with jobs running synchronously, just because for your development purposes, for right now, as long as you're not doing anything that's going to take a crazy long time to complete, such as working on file uploads, file downloads, imports, bulk operations, things like that, all of that really doesn't necessarily need to be run asynchronously for development's sake. So you can run all of these synchronously. It's actually really handy because it allows you to use an inline debugger and some other stuff. Yep, as I explained, it reduces the load on request, reduces the load to the server, and all of these can be found in app jobs. So let us go to an example. Alex, can you think of a good example? What's a good one to show these folks?
2FA?
Sure. Sure.
Or a handheld, if you want to sync a handheld up.
So handheld. What's the one I had here? Oh, process activity service. Process activity queue.
It's sending. I think this is the wrong one.
Sending data activity.
Yeah, that one.
Sending data activity API controller.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. This just changed. You know, you're right.
To FA.
Do 2FA. Oh, the other one just changed.
2FA changed as well. What's a good?
No, 2FA is good.
What's the name of the file again? Just 2FA. Does it have the number 2 in it or the string 2? Two-factor authentication code. That's a notification. Where's the job? Do you remember?
Checking.
Chicken store usage base job.
Should it be in jobs here?
It is a job. It's one of the generic email jobs.
Here, we could do the activation link one. Kind of does the same thing. Okay, so let's see. So everybody navigate to app jobs, send activation link.php. Yep, and raise your, I'll give everybody 10 seconds because I think we all know how to get there. We're all pretty comfortable with navigating around our editors. Control P, send activation link.php. When you got it, looks like we got 50% of our people. 75%. Awesome. Looks like we got everybody. So we're on send activation link.php. This is going to have two methods which we care about the most. The first one is the initializer, the constructor right here. This is important because what it's going to do is it's actually going to define what information we're going to be able to use in the job when the handle method is called. Because a lot of times if these run asynchronously, we need to be able to specifically provide PHP information that handle can use when this runs asynchronously. So handle executes the job. What it's going to do is it's going to use this email helper, and it's going to send an email, and it's going to send it based on this template. This app mail is an email template right here, and we can see where this job is queued by. Everybody go ahead, and I think maybe we should be able to do this, but it's right here in the user login service. Everybody, let's create two windows and go to our user login service. See if we can look at these side by side. Again, if you want to look at things side by side and you're in VS Code, you can go to View, Editor Layout, 2 columns. Give us like 10 seconds to get there.
Or you can just take the tab at the top and you can drag it off to the right and it'll kind
Or
of
you-
highlight where you're going.
Yeah, or you could do that too. So again, these two methods right here are Laravel provided. We do not define these directly. Laravel has magic to build it, and then this handle method is the Laravel magic that's going to be, is the Laravel magically named method that's going to be called when we need to execute this job. Dispatch is another one of these. So this extends something called mailing job, which implements something called should queue. Should queue is the base should queue is the base interface that you're going to use when creating a new job. Alex, do you want to send some jobs documentation in the chat to kind of give people maybe a little bit more information? But really, this dispatch method right here is saying on line 291, hey, we need to send this activation link. We don't want to send this synchronously. We want to send this asynchronously in production. So we're going to dispatch this job, and then it's going to add it to our queue. As we are processing our queue, we are going to handle this job, and using the things provided in the constructor, which is also the same things right here. Dispatch will also construct. That's another thing. Dispatch, these parameters, same as constructor parameters. Again, more Laravel magic, different method name, but you're still constructing it. And then once this handle is called, within the queue process, it will send this email out to somebody. I'm going to check in the chat, see if people got any questions. Does anyone have any questions on jobs? Again, not quite exactly pertaining to all modules, but just another functionality of our web app to kind of reduce our load, speed it up, and optimize it. Anybody have any questions on how queue jobs work?
Let me add a little bit of context here.
Got it.
So we enqueue jobs when we don't want something to happen when you send the request, right? You want it to happen in the background, but it needs to be done by some external processor. So XPressEntry Web Console, when it gets installed, there's 4 different services that run. There's the web service, which is Nginx. There's the PHP is running in the, and interfacing with Nginx. There's a third one, which is the queues. That is a processor that is waiting for jobs to be available. So what this does is when you dispatch a job, it creates an entry in the database saying here's a job that needs to run, and then the service that is running the queue is checking that table pretty consistently, and when there's a job available, it will execute it. So it is for things that you want to happen outside of the life cycle of you submitting a request. A couple examples: sending an email. We don't necessarily want to, if you're going to send an email out to people, which might take some amount of time depending on the SMTP setup, you want that to happen later. You say, we're going to send this email to the person who's sitting in front of the computer, and then in the background, it goes off and sends the email. Processing activities from handhelds. That's another big one. If I am submitting an activity or 1,000 activities from a handheld that's been offline, it's just inserting them into the database, but not going through the whole processing of them. So it can send a response to the handheld saying, we got the activities. Then in the background, it goes through and it goes and processes all of those activities. So anything that you want to happen in the background, that's when you would use a job.
Thank you for the real life context, Alex. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, so Alex, you said it gets put into a database table. What table? Where's it get put?
This table, it gets placed in the
queues.
It gets placed in the queues table.
Yep. Which is a table that we added to the XPressEntry database as well.
So yes, we use a database-driven queue. So as when things are dispatched within the request cycle, this will add a record to that queues table. Supervisor or whatever is running our queue services is going to be looking at that table to retrieve these queues, rebuild them, and then call this handle method to execute the actions that need to happen.
Are the queues only used for like XPtrack multi-tenant installs, as opposed to like if you were running the XPressEntry like Windows service in the background?
Well, some
Or
of
in
them
tandem?
are, some of them are, some of them are not. Again, all of the handheld, so anything that is a handheld queue related on the XPtrack code base will not be run because the handhelds interface with the XPressEntry service. But in terms of things like email sends or imports, those will be running in the XPtrack, on the web console's queue services, not on the XPressEntry service.
Got it.
Cool. One final thing, and do I see anything else in the chat? Nope. One final thing before we get to the challenge, I just want to talk about Redis. Redis, again, does not pertain to the web console at all. It is used on XPtrack and XPressEntry Web only. It is a lightning fast caching solution for key value pairs. It is persistent in memory across request cycles, and it provides an XPE service-esque caching functionality, mainly for handhelds. So for those of you unaware, the XPressEntry service uses a caching system in its delivery of data to handhelds, basically in order to optimize database queries. So a lot of times multiple handhelds will be asking for the same packet of data at the same time. We don't want to query that in the database. Having it in a queue, or not a queue, a cache, it is much easier to find it based on the version that you need and send it over the line as CSV that's already parsed, already ready to go, and it doesn't require a ton of database hits per handheld, per a bunch of handhelds. Redis allows us to do that on the website. That's really it. Alex, am I missing anything there? I want to give the highest level possible because most of these folks won't really be interacting with it for right now.
No, that's fine.
Cool. All right.